This lesson is on roles in an ecosystem, organisms' roles in an ecosystem. It's also known as their niche. You have three basic categories of organisms. You have producers. They're organisms that make their own food. They make their own sugars and carbohydrates using a process called photosynthesis. You also have consumers. Now, a consumer is any organism that has to eat another organism to survive. I almost said any organism that has a mouth because you'd think if it had to eat an organism, then it would have to have a mouth. But there are some single-celled organisms that really just kind of consume it and envelope it. So I didn't want to make any like big broad statements like all consumers have a mouth. Last, you have decomposers, which definitely do not have a mouth. And they're the things that break down dead stuff, and they take those nutrients and return them to the soil so that they can be used by producers later on. Now, the flow of energy and nutrients in an ecosystem are really pretty simple. Producers, they take the sun's energy and they convert it to a form that everything else can use. They draw nutrients out of the ground. They draw water out of the ground. They take carbon dioxide out of the air. They process it all. They make what they need to grow. They make that energy to take the sun's energy, converts it, and then it's eaten by consumers. And we have several categories of consumers that we're going to look at here in a minute. After the consumers are done and they die out, food chain stuff that we're going to study later, then the decomposers come in, and the decomposers break it all down, take their rotting, carcassy flesh and take the bacterial wastes or whatever, and they break it down and take those nutrients that made up their bodies, and they return it to the soil, things like carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen. And these things are later used by producers again to start the circle all over. I would sing now, but this is on EduVision, and I'm afraid half the county would see it, and we don't want that. Let's start with producers. Producers are some of my favorite. Producers are the ones that are easy because they generally don't move by themselves. They have to be windblown or ocean current moved or something like that. They include plants. They include algae. This is my algae. Algae is kind of like that scummy stuff on top of ponds and lakes. See my water ripples? And then, of course, plankton. Okay? All producers are either photosynthetic or chemosynthetic. Now, chemosynthetic we don't need to worry about right now. You'll learn about that in 7th and 8th grade. But we're going to photosynthetic. Photosynthetic means that they take energy from the sun and use it to make their own food. That's what plants do. That's what algae does. That's what plankton does, even though we see him making chum. Plankton are actually little organisms out in the ocean. Okay, and they have really basic way that they make energy. It's a complicated process, but what you get is pretty basic. They take sunlight, they mix it with water and carbon dioxide, and what they end up doing is making the sugar they need to grow. Then they release water as a byproduct through transpiration, and they also release the oxygen that organisms, animals on the planet need to breathe. From producers, we go on to consumers. Now, like I said, consumers are anything that eats another organism. Ants, grasshoppers, lions, bears, tigers, monkeys, fish, birds, every single animal on the planet. And I mean every animal on the planet, okay? If it moves by its own volition, which means that it has legs and it crawls or walks, and it eats, then it is a consumer. Now, consumers have three categories that you need to know about. We have herbivores. Herbivores eat only plants, herbs. Okay, it's in green, kind of like the producer board. Get you thinking green, producers, it eats producers. Then you have carnivores in red, meat, blood. Carnivores eat other animals. Whether it's a frog that eats a fly, or whether it's the snake that eats the frog, or whether the hawk that eats the snake. All of those organisms are eating another animal in order to live. And then you have omnivores, are animals like bears and human beings that we eat vegetables and we eat meat. And we can survive off both. And we adapt our diet to what's in the area. We have a special category of consumer also, and those are scavengers. Scavengers are like turkey vultures, hyenas, catfish. And what these things are, these are organisms that eat what's left over after something else has already come in and killed it. They're important to getting things ready for decomposers. And they eat dead stuff. It's kind of gross. Last, we have decomposers. These are our mushrooms. This is our fungus, like what grows between some of y'all's toes. And then bacteria. These are small organisms. They don't get super large like plants or trees. Mushrooms are one of the easiest confused substances that you guys will come across. You guys will want to say, oh, it's a plant. No, it's not a producer. It's a decomposer. It actually grows on dead plants, breaks them down, and takes their nutrients and returns it to the soil that can later be used by plants in their process. You guys like to confuse this one, and you guys like to confuse plankton and algae too. You like to say that algae is a decomposer. It's not. It's a producer. Pretty much anything that's green and doesn't move is a producer. Okay? So mushrooms, decomposers. Fungus is a decomposer. Bacteria is a decomposer. They break stuff down. They return the nutrients to the soil. All this stuff is going to lead us to food chains that we're going to talk about later on. And it all kind of mixes together in each of the different biomes. And we're going to look at each biome individually at a later date.